Welcome to tonight's Terror, where you can expect original scary stories. Nothing here is written or narrated by AI. If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for visiting, and enjoy the story.
Even though this happened in the 90s, I can remember most aspects in vivid detail. That's partially because I walked the levels of that parking garage so many times I probably wore a path in the concrete, and partially because my last night on the job was the closest I've ever come to dying, and I can't shake the memory, try as I may. The job was excruciatingly simple. I sat in a booth at the exit of the garage. People would hand me their ticket, I'd tell them what they owed, they'd pass me a few coins or bills, and I'd hit the button to open the gate. Gate is a pretty grand term for it. It was a yellow and black striped wooden bar. From my booth, I could see one level of the parking lot and the bank of elevators that took people to the street level or up into the office building above. They were mostly employees of a large law firm from what I could tell. Many worked normal hours, but others would leak from the elevator, exhausted, as late as 2 a.m. I knew they made plenty of money. Their cars were evidence of that. But when I'd see these paralegals and lawyers stumbling bleary-eyed for their cars in the wee hours of my shift, I didn't envy them. I occupied myself doing laps of my level of the garage when I knew it would be slow, or I could do push-ups in the narrow space between the counter inside the booth. Much of the time I'd read, whatever Stephen King's latest happened to be. I'd nod off from time to time as the night wore on, but I never caught any flack for it. The garage had an automatic car counter. When a car came in, the counter would tick up by 1. When I raised the bar and let someone out, it would tick down. During business hours, that number would be in the hundreds. Though, most times I worked the night shift. When I'd clock in at 8 p.m., the garage might have 20 cars left in it. The counter lit up with red numbers and hung over the window of the booth. I probably glanced up and checked it 50 times each shift for no real reason. I wasn't doing anything with that information. I'd read maybe 30 pages of The Dark Tower 3 when I started to rest my eyes between paragraphs. The hum of the fluorescent tube lights in my booth and the light ticking of the space heater on the floor were a soothing combination. It must have been past midnight when I drifted off. I was shocked awake by the blast of a car horn. I gasped the way people do in movies when they're breaking free of a nightmare. A gleaming black Lexus sat inches from the gate. I sat up and sheepishly glanced at the driver. He turned his palms up and gestured to the bar, blocking his way as if to say, "Any time now." I was so flustered I smacked the button and raised the gate without thinking. The car was rolling up the ramp and out of sight as it occurred to me that I hadn't asked him to pay. With a sigh, I looked forlornly at the cash register. The drawer would come up short tonight, and I'd come in to find a nasty note from the manager on my next shift. My heart was still pounding from the rude awakening the car had given me. I decided to take a walk around the garage to stretch my legs and calm down. Instinctively, I checked the car counter as I stepped out. 19. Typical, I murmured to the empty garage. The circuit around the entry level of the garage was more than familiar to me. 40 steps to the maintenance van that never seemed to move. 20 more steps to the oil-stained handicap spot. The always locked restroom on my left. The elevator bank after that. As I approached the elevator doors, the chimes sang out. Someone was leaving work for the night. I didn't want to surprise anyone at this hour, so I tried to hurry on my way. However, I only succeeded in making it directly in front of the doors as they opened. A widening block of light from the elevator illuminated the concrete and then me. I looked up to see no one. The elevator was empty. I stood peering into the brightly lit, sticky tiled space. I was unsettled by the strange timing and the unoccupied elevator. As I turned to leave, the doors began to close. Once the light behind me was extinguished by the closing doors, I started back toward the booth. The doors opened again. I don't know what I was expecting, but I froze and looked back. The elevator sat empty. As I watched the doors close again, I sensed something overt and meaningful in this little encounter, like someone or something was intentionally occupying my attention here, over nothing. Suddenly, it felt like I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood, and a shock crawled across my scalp. I whipped around, ready to fight or run. I was alone. There was only the gray, unfeeling concrete floors, pillars, and walls of the garage. Ahead, in stenciled yellow print, huge letters read, "Way Out," with an arrow pointing toward the exit. I'm considering it, I thought soberly. I strode quickly back to my post and leaned against the door jamb with an exasperated sigh. I'd had upsetting moments on this job before. However, all those involved patrons of the garage, combative about the fees, or convinced the garage was responsible for a scratch on their fender. This one time, I'd come across a drunk passed out in the stairwell. He'd taken a swing at me once I'd finally roused him and told him to get out. That was a scary night. The elevator was different. I'm embarrassed to use the word, but it felt paranormal. After keeping my eyes fixed on the elevator for a good 5 minutes, I finally let myself settle back in my chair. The buzzing red numbers of the car counter drew my gaze upward. 20? I said aloud. I couldn't understand when a car could have entered the garage since I stepped out. I was within shouting distance of the gate the entire time. I'd seen nothing, heard nothing. I turned to the 6x6-inch monitor bolted into the countertop and spooled back the black and white security footage. The system had 2 channels, one for the entrance, one for the exit. I reviewed the entrance footage for the last hour. I watched myself step out of the booth, stretch, and amble off screen. The entrance gate sat still for several minutes, and then I came back, looking over my shoulder at the elevator as I approached the booth again. So the car counter was faulty? I'd have to leave a note for management. I didn't see how such a simple mechanism could fail, but I didn't have to figure it out. It was certainly another bizarre moment during an increasingly unnerving shift. Have you ever noticed that car tires screech when you drive around corners in a parking garage, even if the car isn't going very fast? When they build these places, they coat the surface with an epoxy to make the concrete more resilient. The stuff is meant to deflect chemicals and stains. I don't know if it works, but it makes an ungodly racket any time a car is moving through the garage. The screeching came on suddenly, echoing up from another level of the subterranean structure. Someone was on the move, likely a lawyer who'd finally given up prepping their briefs for the night. I'd learned the way this place would talk, tell me when someone was on the way. I could even predict how long it would take for a car to appear at my window once I heard the tires eking around some turn down below. Still feeling foolish at having been woken up by a patron less than an hour ago, I sat up straight in my chair, dutifully waiting to collect the fee and raise the gate. Seconds passed, then a minute. No car appeared at my window. The screeching sounds of tires had stopped quickly after I'd first heard them. Who moves their car in a parking garage but doesn't leave? I thought. I strained my ears for another sound, any indication of movement. The peace I normally enjoyed struck me as alarming now. A solitary bead of sweat ran down the track of my spine. This was absurd. Nothing had happened. Yet I felt convinced something was about to. I tried to turn my focus back to my King novel. The words blurred together. My mind was still latched onto the strange sequence of events. I glanced at the counter again. 20. Where was this car? The sound of movement snapped me from my pondering. It was subtle, like the faint shuffle of feet. I leaned forward, straining to see past the glare of the fluorescent lights reflecting off the glass. I stepped to the door of the booth and looked out at the tableau of vehicles spread across the concrete lanes of the garage. There was something out of place. A shape, something dark and bulky beside a high-end BMW. In a rush, I realized I was looking at a person. A figure was crouched low at the rear bumper. Their silhouette was scarcely outlined in the dim light spilling from the fixtures above. I was nearly convinced that I was imagining it, spooked by a shadow. But then it moved, shifting slightly, like he was adjusting his position to stay hidden. "Hey!" I shouted, stepping forward abruptly. My voice echoed off the concrete walls, sounding more timid than authoritative. I'm not sure why I shouted at all. Dealing with a trespasser was none of my job. The figure didn't move. I shifted from foot to foot nervously. Then, without warning, he leaned away and out of sight behind the car. What's with this guy? I thought. He knows I've seen him. I grabbed the flashlight from the booth and stepped back outside, my breath visible in the chilled air. I stepped forward cautiously. "Hello?" I called, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I know someone's out here. You need to leave. This is private property." I steeled my nerves and rounded the corner of the BMW. There was no one. I was about to turn and go when a slight scratch pulled my gaze downward. A sneakered foot slipped under the car. I backed away, now genuinely fearing for my safety. This wasn't the average drunk. This person was either unwell or up to something bad, or both. I was at least 10 feet from the car now, staring at the spot on the concrete where the foot had disappeared. A soft clink came from somewhere to my left, metal on metal. I whipped the flashlight in that direction just in time to see a shadow dart behind a pillar. I stumbled backward, heart thumping in my chest, and sprinted back to the booth. Once inside, I slid the plexiglass door shut and locked it. Seizing the phone from its cradle on the wall, my fingers trembled as I punched in 911. 911, what's your location and emergency? I spat out the address and continued. There's someone in the parking garage, trying to keep my voice calm. The dispatcher didn't respond. Hello?
Yes, sir. There's someone in the parking garage. Is there an emergency?
Frustrated with my inability to be coherent, I shook my head and started again. I mean, there's someone who shouldn't be here. They're hiding under cars and sneaking around. I think they might be dangerous.
Are you in a safe location?
I'm locked in my booth.
Stay there. Officers are on their way. Do not confront the individual.
I dropped the phone, and it bounced in the air on its coiled wire as a new sound reached my ears. The familiar, slow squeal of the gate opening. I turned to the monitor. My stomach felt like it was full of ice water. The entrance gate was rising, but no car had triggered it. Then came the sound of footsteps, fast, heavy footsteps. The shadow of a man appeared in the dim light, He was sprinting toward the booth. I barely had time to process what was happening before he slammed into the glass, his face twisted in a snarl. He pounded on the door with his fists a few times, leering in at me. Suddenly, he backed away. I thought he was going to leave. Instead, he charged at the booth, full speed, and threw himself at the door, leading with his shoulder. The plexiglass spiderwebbed with white cracks. "Man, you need to get out of here," I shouted, backing up against the counter and fumbling for anything I might use as a weapon. He reared back and slammed his head into the door. The shock of the impact seemed to surprise him, but then he did it again and again. The sound of his forehead thudding into the buckling door was stomach-turning. He didn't seem to feel the pain it must have been causing him. Blood began to run between his eyes, around the curve of his nostrils and down into his mouth. He bared his teeth. They were outlined in dark crimson. For no reason I could discern, he suddenly staggered back from the door and began staring wildly around him. Something seemed to catch his eye, and he stormed off toward the BMW again. The seconds dragged on as I watched the man claw at the seams of the car's driver's side window, trying to force it open. My eyes darted to the monitor, begging the red and blue lights of a patrol car to appear. Finally, they did. I exhaled deeply. The man noticed, too. He froze for a moment before turning and bolting toward the exit. The officers were quick, though. They intercepted him before he could reach the stairwell door. One wrestled him to the ground, and the other pinned his ankles together. The older of the two cops glanced toward the booth and gave me a curt nod. After the officers had cuffed the man, I stepped outside. They'd separated him from a ratty-looking green duffel bag. It must have been stashed behind the Beamer. I stood back while the police laid the bag and his other possessions on the hood of their car. They talked in low voices with their backs turned. Moments before, they had sat the man in the back seat of the police cruiser. I looked, grimly, at the man who had tried to kill me. Now, forced to hold still, he was just as horrifying, wild-eyed and sweaty, muttering something I couldn't hear. There was a break in the officer's conversation. "Did he hurt anyone?" I asked. "No," one of the officers replied, "but it looks like he's been stalking the area for weeks. We found a set of photos in his bag. Pictures of one of the lawyers who works here. He also had plenty of gear to bind someone and seriously injure them." I asked the officers about the odd happenings that preceded me encountering the man. The inexplicable changes to the car count, the elevator doors. They exchanged puzzled glances. I think they assumed I was in shock. Then one of them told me that I'd know better than them why our equipment was acting up. The rest of the night passed in a haze of paperwork and questioning. But one thing was clear. I'd come far too close to something unspeakably dangerous. I never worked another shift at that garage.